In a world of corporate greed, secrets are buried deep. But what if a humble waitress was the only person alive who could expose a powerful CEO's darkest lie? Waitress Eva drops her tray when she sees a diner's scar, whispering, I know you. You're the man who saved me from the fire. She expected to be fired. She expected to be humiliated. She never expected that moment of recognition would ignite a war, bringing the ruthless CEO to her diner the very next day. Before we start the story, your support means everything to us. Like, comment, and subscribe so we can meet again. It was 9 p.m., and the clatter of plates at the corner bistro had finally slowed to a dull rhythm. Eva felt the exhaustion deep in her bones, a familiar ache that started in her feet and settled permanently behind her eyes. She was a ghost in a cheap apron, wiping down sticky tables on autopilot, her mind already on the long bus ride home. Her boss, Mitch, bellowed from behind the counter, his voice slicing through the thin music. Eva, table 6 is complaining about their coffee. Are you even listening? Stop spacing out. She nodded, not meeting his gaze, her jaw tight. Yes, Mitch. Sorry, Mitch. He was a man whose small power was his only joy, and she was his favorite target. She finished the table and slipped into the tiny, mildew-scented break room, pulling open her rusted locker. The first thing she saw was the pink paper, a final notice for her student debt, the numbers swimming in aggressive red ink. It was a crushing weight, a daily reminder that she wasn't just tired, she was trapped in a cycle she couldn't break. Her fingers trembled as she pushed it aside, revealing the other piece of paper, the one that truly defined her. It was a newspaper clipping, so old the edges were brown and the fold lines were as deep as scars. She'd laminated it with packing tape years ago, but it was still fading, a relic from 15 years ago. The headline was bold, black ink shouting, "Mysterious hero saves 10 children from Cedar Hill blaze." She traced the grainy photo of the orphanage, a building she only remembered as a roaring furnace of smoke and screams. She was one of those 10 children. That hero, a man no one ever identified, was the only reason she was here, alive to be drowning in debt instead of buried in ash. She touched the headline, a silent, "Thank you," she'd repeated thousands of times, a ritual of gratitude that kept her going. Closing the locker, the metal groaning in protest, she took a deep breath. She had to finish the shift. Steeling herself, she pushed back into the dining room, ready to face the last hour. That's when the bell above the door chimed, a weak, hesitant sound. A man, Samuel, stumbled in. He wasn't just disheveled, he looked utterly lost, wearing a thin jacket against the night chill and carrying an aura of profound defeat. His eyes, wide and hunted, scanned the room as if he'd taken a wrong turn into a palace. The few remaining customers instinctively recoiled. A woman at table 4 audibly skegged, pulling her expensive purse closer to her body. 2 other waiters near the kitchen rolled their eyes, one muttering to the other, "Great, just what we need. Smells like the alley." They made themselves busy, actively avoiding the man as he shuffled to a small, dark booth in the corner, his hands shaking so much he could barely pick up the menu, though he never once looked at it. He was invisible and unwelcome, a ghost from a different world, and Eva felt the familiar, uncomfortable pang of pity. Mitch's footsteps were heavy as he stormed over to the corner booth, slamming his order pad on the table. Samuel jumped, his whole body flinching. "What'll it be?" Mitch barked, his voice dripping with contempt. Samuel stammered, I just, a glass of water, please. I'm just, a glass of water," Mitch repeated, his voice dangerously low. He leaned in, placing both hands on the table, towering over the frail man. "Look around, old man. Does this look like a homeless shelter to you?" No, sir, This is a place of business. You either order a meal, and I'm talking the New York strip, our most expensive item, or you get the hell out of my restaurant. We don't serve freeloaders here. The cruelty was breathtaking, a casual, public humiliation. Samuel shrank back into the vinyl booth, his face ashen. He tried to make himself smaller, to disappear. Eva watched from behind the service counter, her stomach twisting into a cold, hard knot. Every instinct screamed at her to step in, to say something, but she could feel Mitch's gaze, a silent warning. She remembered the pink slip in her locker, the rent she couldn't pay, the fact that this job, this miserable, demeaning job, was the only thing keeping her from being on the street just like that old man. Her fear was a physical thing, a cold hand over her mouth, choking her. She saw the other waiters turn their backs, suddenly fascinated by the coffee machine, by the dessert display, by anything other than the cruelty unfolding in their dining room. Just keep your head down, Eva. You can't save everyone. You can't even save yourself. She tried to move, but she was frozen. She had to do something. She couldn't just stand there. She took a half step forward, ready to defy Mitch, ready to say, "I'll cover his meal, consequences be damned." But just as she committed to the act, Samuel moved. He reached a shaky hand toward the glass of water Mitch had pointedly ignored. The sleeve of his thin jacket, worn and frayed, rode up his forearm, and Eva stopped breathing. It wasn't the shaking that caught her eye. It was the scar, a jagged, angry red map of melted skin that started at his wrist and snaked up his arm, disappearing under his sleeve. It was a scar she knew intimately. It was a scar that had haunted her nightmares and her daydreams for 15 years. She saw it not in the dim light of the diner, but illuminated by roaring, terrible fire, reaching through a broken, smoke-filled window, grabbing her own small arm, pulling her from the inferno. The world tilted. The sounds of the diner, the clinking glass, Mitch's grumbling, the quiet music faded into a distant roar. The heavy oval tray in her hand, loaded with 2 steaks and a side of fries, suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. It slipped from her numb fingers. The crash was explosive, a deafening shatter of ceramic and glass, followed by the splat of food on the tiled floor. The entire restaurant went dead silent. Mitch spun around, his face purple with rage. "Eva, what the hell?" But Eva didn't hear him. She didn't see the mess. She couldn't move. Her eyes were locked on the man, who now stared at her, terrified by the sudden noise. She took one step, then another, walking through the wreckage of the plates, her voice a dry, rasping whisper that somehow filled the silence. "It's you," she breathed. You're the man who saved me from the fire." Mitch's face, which had been purple with rage, paled. His voice, when it came, was a low, vicious hiss that cut through the silence. "Eva, you're fired. Clean out your locker and get out. You've destroyed my dining room and you're harassing the customers." The remaining diners were frozen, their forks halfway to their mouths, watching the drama unfold. But Eva didn't even look at her boss. She didn't see the shattered plates or the splattered food. Her entire world had shrunk to the man in the booth, who was now slowly, painfully, getting to his feet, his eyes locked on hers. "No," Samuel whispered, his voice trembling but finding a sudden, strange clarity. "Please, sir, it was my fault. I startled her. Don't fire her." He looked at Eva, his eyes wide with a dawning, impossible question. Eva took another step, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, completely ignoring Mitch's sputtering. "It is you, isn't it?" She pressed, her voice cracking with 15 years of held-back emotion. Cedar Hill, 15 years ago, the fire. The name hung in the air, a physical thing. Mitch stopped yelling. The entire restaurant held its breath. Samuel's face, etched with grime and exhaustion, crumpled. The fear vanished. replaced by a profound, agonizing shock that shook his entire body. "You," he stammered, his scarred hand instinctively going to his chest. "You were one of the children?" Tears streamed down Eva's face now, hot and unstoppable, washing away the exhaustion and the fear. "I'm Eva," she said, her voice thick. "I was in the last room, on the second floor. The window was stuck. You broke it with your arm. You pulled me from the window." She was sobbing, but she was also smiling, a strange, pained expression of pure gratitude. "I thought you were a ghost, a hero. They said they never found you." Samuel just stared at her, as if she were the ghost. He looked down at his scarred arm, then back at her face. "Eva," he repeated, the name a prayer. He didn't just save a child, he saved this woman. The moment broke. Mitch, seeing his customers' rapt expressions, just pointed a shaking finger at the door. "Out, both of you. I want you out. Now." Eva didn't care. She turned, walked to her locker, grabbed her thin jacket, and returned. She gently took Samuel's arm. "Come on," she said. They walked out, leaving the mess, the job, and her old life behind. They stood in the cold alley, the sounds of the diner muffled. The adrenaline was gone, and now she just saw a sick, terribly tired old man. "Where did you go?" she asked, her voice soft. "Why did no one know who you were?" Samuel shivered, pulling his jacket tight. "Oh, they knew," he said, his voice a bitter rasp. "They knew. I lost my job. I was a janitor at a nearby building, they said. They said I was a risk, a liability. The fire, they tried to say I was unstable, that I was obsessed with it." Ava was horrified. "But you're a hero." "They don't like heroes, girl. They like neat stories." He coughed, a deep, rattling sound that scared her. "I lost everything. My job, my apartment, my reputation. That fire, it didn't just scar my arm. It burned my whole life to the ground. I've been on the streets, mostly, ever since. I have no one. I'm sick, Eva." "I'm really sick." Eva looked at the man who had sacrificed everything to give her a future, a man who now had no future of his own. The true stakes were suddenly, terribly clear. He had saved her life. Now it was her turn to save his. Miles away, in an office overlooking the city skyline, a man named Griffin Croft stared at his phone, his face a mask of cold fury. The voice on the other end was clipped, professional. "We found him." A waitress at a downtown diner, someplace called the Corner Bistro, just identified him, made a whole scene, called him a hero. Griffin's grip on the phone tightened, his knuckles white. "The pie," Nash continued. "He's off-grid, but she's the key. What are your orders?" Griffin's voice was ice. "Handle it. I don't care how. I want him in an institution, or I want him gone. And the girl? Make her understand what happens when she gets involved in things that don't concern her. No more loose ends, Nash. Am I clear?" He ended the call, the silence in his vast office more threatening than any shout. Ava fumbled with the key, her hands still shaking, and pushed open the door to her tiny, one-room apartment. It was barely more than a closet, with a sagging couch, a kitchenette, and a single twin bed crammed into the corner. The air smelled like old wallpaper and her own exhaustion. Samuel stood in the doorway, looking overwhelmed by even this small, run-down space. "It's not much," Eva said, her voice small, "but it's safe, and it's warm." His cough was his only reply. She immediately went to the bed, pulling off the thin comforter. "You take the bed. You're sick, you need to rest." "Eva, no, I can't. This is your home. You saved my life," she said, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "The couch is fine for me. This is the least I can do." She was repaying a 15-year-old debt with the only thing she had left to give. He finally, gratefully, sat on the edge of the mattress, a man who had once been a hero, now reduced to taking charity from a waitress who had just lost her job for him. The next morning, Ava woke with a start, her neck stiff from the lumpy couch. The reality of being unemployed crashed down on her, the pink slip, the debt, and now another mouth to feed. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She had no choice. She had to go back. She had to beg Mitch for her job. Maybe he'd cooled off. Maybe she could offer to pay for the plates out of her tips for the next year. Leaving Samuel with a glass of water and the one apple in her fridge, she walked the 2 miles back to the corner bistro, her stomach in knots. She arrived just after 10:30, full of anxiety, pushing the door open, ready to plead. But the words died in her throat. The restaurant was quiet, but it wasn't empty. She wasn't back at work. She was walking straight into a trap. Eva pushed the door open, her apology to Mitch already on her lips, but it vanished. The diner was dead silent. Mitch was there, but he was backed against the coffee machine, his face pale and sweaty. 2 large men in cheap, ill-fitting suits stood in the middle of the room, blocking the light. They looked like professional wrestlers, not customers, and their eyes scanned the room with a flat, bored menace. Outside, a black SUV was parked on the curb, its engine humming, a visible threat. A third man, smaller but radiating a chilling authority, stepped away from the counter and turned to face her. This was Nash. "Eva?" he asked. It wasn't a question, it was a confirmation. Yes, can I help you?" "We're looking for a man," Nash said, his voice like gravel. "Samuel Croft. We were told you were seen with him last night. Where is he?" Eva's blood ran cold. "Croft? I don't know anyone by that name. I met a man named Samuel, an old man." Nash smiled, a thin, cruel expression. He took a step closer, invading her space. "Don't play dumb, sweetheart. It's not a good look. Samuel Croft." About 5'10", graying hair, big scar on his right arm. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "You're harboring a dangerous, mentally unstable individual. You think he's a hero? You think he saved you from that fire?" He laughed, a short barking sound. "Lady, he's a pyromaniac. He started the Cedar Hill blaze. That scar on his arm, he got that setting the fire, not putting it out. He's sick. He's been in and out of institutions for years. He's obsessed with it. And now you've dragged him out into the open." Eva's knees felt weak. It couldn't be. The man she'd saved, the hero from her childhood, a pyromaniac? The world tilted. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. He pulled me out. I remember." "You remember what he told you?" Nash snapped, his patience gone. "He's a manipulator, and he's dangerous. So you tell me where he is, right now, or you're an accomplice." Nash's fake smile vanished, replaced by pure intimidation. He reached into his jacket and threw a heavy, expensive business card onto the counter. It read, "Griffin Croft, CEO, Croft Industries." "That's his nephew," Nash said, his voice flat. "Griffin has been trying to get his uncle the help he needs for years. He's a good man, trying to protect his family's legacy from a sick relative. And now you're interfering. You are officially obstructing a private investigation and harboring a mentally unstable person." He leaned in one last time, his voice a low threat. "We won't call the cops. We handle things ourselves. You have 1 hour to call my number with his location. If you don't, we'll find him anyway, and we'll find you. You don't want to know what happens next." He nodded to his 2 thugs, and the 3 men turned and walked out, leaving a void of cold terror in their wake. The black SUV sped off. Eva was shaking, her mind reeling. A pyromaniac? Griffin Croft? Before she could even process the threat, Mitch, who had overheard every word, exploded from behind the counter. His fear had instantly turned to self-righteous rage. "A pyromaniac? You brought a pyromaniac to my diner? You're involved with criminals? No, Mitch. I swear. I didn't know. I knew it. He shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at the door. I knew you were trouble from the second you dropped that tray. You're fired. For real this time. Get out of my restaurant. Now. I don't want you, or your crazy fire-starting friends, anywhere near this place ever again. Go. Humiliated, jobless, and now terrified for her life, Eva stumbled backward, pushing through the door. The street seemed too bright, too loud. She had nowhere to go. She couldn't go back to her apartment. They would find her, and they would find Samuel. She fled, tears blurring her vision, and collapsed onto a cold metal bench 2 blocks away. She was out of a job, out of options, and completely alone, her childhood hero possibly a dangerous monster. As she put her head in her hands, her whole body shaking with sobs, a different car from the thuggish SUV pulled up to the curb in front of her. It wasn't a black truck. It was a sleek, dark gray Audi, the kind that whispered wealth, not brute force. It parked silently, and the tinted back window glided down. Eva wiped her eyes, looking up from the bench as the sleek gray Audi's window glided down. An elegant woman in a perfectly tailored navy suit, Miss Aris, stepped out, her heels clicking quietly on the pavement. She looked completely out of place on this grimy street, radiating a calm authority that was the exact opposite of Nash's thuggish menace. She held a tablet. "Miss Eva?" she asked, her voice smooth and kind. Eva, still clutching the threatening business card, just nodded, unable to speak. "I thought I might find you here," Ms. Aris said. "My name is Ms. Aris. I was Samuel Croft's personal attorney a long time ago, before he was removed." Eva's head snapped up. "You know him? Those men who just left? They said he was dangerous, a pyromaniac." Ms. Aris's eyes hardened as she spotted the card in Eva's hand. "Griffin Croft," she said, her voice dripping with sudden ice. "May I?" Eva numbly handed her the card. Miss Aris looked at it with utter contempt. "He's the real criminal, Eva, not Samuel. Griffin is the one who should be in an institution." She ripped the heavy card in half, then again, and let the pieces flutter into a nearby trash can. "Those men are private contractors, hired liars. Please, get in the car. You're not safe, and you need to know the truth." Dazed, Eva slid into the plush leather interior. The door shut with a heavy, satisfying thunk, sealing out the noise and the fear of the street. "What is going on?" Eva whispered. "Who is Samuel?" Ms. Aris turned to face her. "The big reveal," she began, her expression serious. "Samuel Croft wasn't a janitor, Eva. He was the founder, the owner, and the original CEO of Croft Industries. He was a good man. A philanthropist. He personally funded and built the Cedar Hill Orphanage with his own money." Eva gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Then, the fire?" "Was not his fault," Ms. Aris said, her voice sharp. "Griffin, his nephew, was managing the construction of a new wing. He cut corners, used substandard, faulty wiring to pad his budget. That is what started the blaze. Samuel was there for a charity event when it happened. He ran inside. He saved you, and 9 other children, while his nephew watched the building, and his criminal negligence, go up in smoke." Eva's mind was spinning, trying to process the revelation. He stole the company, his own uncle? "With devastating precision," Miss Aris said, her face grim as the Audi moved through traffic. "Griffin didn't just cover his tracks. He used Samuel's heroism against him. Samuel had PTSD from the fire, of course. Nightmares. He was haunted by the children he couldn't save. Griffin twisted that trauma. He paid doctors to diagnose him with pyromania-linked delusions. He staged a coup at the board level, presenting his unstable uncle as a liability to the company. He had him declared legally incompetent, took a conservatorship over his entire estate, and then Samuel vanished. Griffin stole everything, his company, his name, his very freedom. Ms. Aris looked at Eva. I've been fighting him for 15 years, Eva, but Griffin's team is ruthless. They've kept Samuel hidden, moving him between private, high-security institutions, keeping him sedated. I thought he was dead, but you found him. Where is he now? My apartment, Eva whispered. It's just up here. Minutes later, Ms. Aris stood in the tiny, cramped room, her composure finally cracking. Samuel was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking small and frail. He looked up, his eyes hazy, and then widened in disbelief. Eleanor? He whispered, his voice cracking. Samuel? My God. Ms. Aris rushed to him, taking his scarred hand. I thought you were dead. I've been trying to find you for so long. They've been hiding me, Eleanor, he said, tears welling in his eyes. Drugging me. They told me everyone was gone, that I was sick. You're not sick, Samuel. You're a victim, she said, her voice fierce. She turned to Eva, then back to him, her legal mind snapping back into place. Listen to me, both of you. We don't have time. We have a final hearing to overturn the conservatorship. It's in 2 days. It was our last-ditch effort, a shot in the dark. We can't win, Samuel murmured, defeated. Griffin has all the power. He did, Ms. Aris said, her gaze intense. For 15 years, Griffin has painted you as a myth, a ghost, or a dangerous lunatic. His lawyers are brilliant. We have documents, but we have no proof of his character, no one to refute the pyromaniac lie. We had no one who was there. She then turned, her full attention on Eva, who stood frozen by the door. Until now, you, Eva, you are the proof. You're not just a witness. You are Exhibit A. You are the living, breathing proof that he is a hero, not a monster. You are the one person Griffin could never account for. Ms. Aris saw the look of terror and confusion on Eva's face and softened her professional tone. Eva, I know this is a lot. You've been dragged into a 15-year-old war in less than 24 hours. You're terrified, and you just lost your job because of us. Eva just nodded, clutching her hands. That is why, Ms. Aris continued, opening a file on her tablet. We aren't just asking for your help. We're offering a solution. This is the formal proposal. Eva looked at the screen. It was a legal document titled the Cedar Hill Hero Fund. What is this? It's a philanthropic trust Samuel established the day the orphanage opened, Ms. Aris explained. It was designed to provide scholarships, housing, and medical care for every child who passed through those doors. It was his greatest passion. When Griffin stole the company, his first act was to freeze and absorb that fund. Billions of dollars, stolen from orphans, just vanished into the corporate accounts. Samuel looked down, ashamed. I couldn't stop him, but now we can, Miss Aris said, her voice electric. Here is the proposal. You testify. You tell your story to the judge, exactly as you told it to me. You become the human face of Griffin's crime. When we win, and with you, Eva, we will win. Samuel's first act upon restoring his control of the company will be to immediately reinstate the Cedar Hill Hero Fund with interest. She looked Eva right in the eye. That means full and immediate repayment of all your outstanding student loans, a relocation grant for new, secure housing, and a fully funded scholarship to any university you choose, so you can finally get the education you deserve. It will pay for everything, Eva. Everything Griffin's men threatened you with, everything you're afraid of right now, it all goes away. You will be safe. You will be free. It was a dream. The answer to every desperate, whispered prayer she'd made in this tiny, cold apartment. No more debt. No more Mitch. A future. A real one. All she had to do was say yes. But her hands were shaking. She thought of Nash's dead eyes. She thought of the two thugs in the diner. She thought of the business card, Griffin Croft, CEO. This wasn't just testifying against a bad boss. It was testifying against a man who made people disappear, a man who had successfully hidden Samuel from the world for 15 years. She was a waitress. What chance did she have against a monster like that? They threatened me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The man, Nash, he said they'd find me, that I didn't want to know what happens next. And we will protect you, Miss Aris said firmly. We have security, the best. You couldn't protect Samuel. Eva shot back, instantly regretting it. Samuel flinched. I'm sorry, I'm just scared. She walked to her locker, her sanctuary, and pulled out the old, taped-up newspaper clipping. She stared at the grainy photo of the blaze, the headline, Mysterious Hero. She held the clipping in her hand, the physical proof of her past, and then looked at Samuel, the living, breathing man who had been destroyed by his own good deed. He was terrified, yes, but he was real. He wasn't a myth. He was the man who had traded his life for hers. The money, the apartment, the scholarship, it all faded away. This was never about a reward. It was about a debt of honor. She turned back to Ms. Aris, her eyes clear for the first time, the fear replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I don't care about the money, Eva said, her voice quiet but ringing with absolute conviction. Ms. Aris raised an eyebrow. I mean it, Eva continued, stronger now. You can keep the fund. You can keep the scholarship. I don't want it. Eva, that's not really. I'm not doing this for a payout, Eva said, cutting her off. She walked over and gently put the newspaper clipping into Samuel's scarred hand. I'm doing this because he saved my life, and I'm not going to stand by and watch the man who saved me be erased by the man who tried to kill him. He saved my life all those years ago. It's time I saved his. A profound, heavy silence filled the tiny apartment as Eva's words, "It's time I saved his," hung in the air. Samuel looked at her, his eyes filled with a new, fragile hope. Ms. Aris, for the first time, looked genuinely moved, but the moment was shattered. A deafening crash exploded from the hallway as the apartment door was kicked open, the deadbolt splintering from the cheap wood frame as if it were paper. The door slammed against the wall, and the room was instantly filled with menace. Nash stepped in first, his cruel smile firmly in place. Behind him, his two large, thuggish associates fanned out, blocking the only exit. And then he entered, stepping over the threshold with an air of profound disgust, as if he were wading through a sewer. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a hand-tailored suit that cost more than the entire apartment building, and his dark hair was perfectly styled. His face was handsome, the kind seen on magazine covers, but his eyes were chips of ice, utterly devoid of empathy. This was Griffin Croft. He surveyed the pathetic little room, the sagging couch, the peeling wallpaper, Samuel on the single bed, Miss Aris in her suit, and finally, Eva, the insignificant waitress. His lip curled into a sneer. Well, well, Griffin said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone that was somehow more threatening than Nash's growl. How incredibly touching. The little orphan girl, come to save her broken-down knight. It's a pathetic little scene, isn't it, Eleanor? After 15 years, this is the best you could do? A confused waitress and... he waved a dismissive hand at Samuel. Samuel visibly flinched, shrinking back, the fragile hope in his eyes dying. Griffin, you are trespassing, Ms. Aris said, her voice shaking with rage as she stepped in front of Samuel. Get out. Oh, I'm terrified, Griffin mocked. He ignored her, his full, terrifying attention landing on Eva. He studied her, from her worn-out shoes to her defiant expression. "You," he said, as if tasting a bad flavor. "You're the one, the little ghost from the fire. You're the one causing all this trouble." He shook his head, feigning disappointment. "Look, I'm a reasonable man. I understand. You're poor. You see an opportunity. You think you've found a golden ticket." He reached into his suit jacket, but instead of a weapon, he pulled out a slim, expensive leather checkbook and a gold pen. He clicked the pen. "So, let's stop this charade. This man is sick. He needs to be in a facility, not in this hovel. You're just enabling his delusions." He held the open checkbook out to her. "Name your price, Eva. I'm feeling generous. What's your student debt? 50,000? 100? Let's make it $500,000. Is that enough for you to disappear? Write any number you want. Just take the money, tell the court you were mistaken, that you were emotional, that this man is not the hero you thought he was. This game is over. You cannot win." Something inside Eva, which had been trembling with fear for 24 hours, suddenly went still. It wasn't bravery, it was rage. A pure, cold, clarifying rage that burned away every last trace of her fear. She was no longer the scared waitress. She wasn't an orphan. She was a survivor. She looked at the checkbook, then at Griffin's handsome, empty face, and she laughed. It was a short, bitter sound. "You think that's your power?" she said, her voice quiet, but it cut through the room. She took a step, and then another, walking right up to Griffin Croft, close enough to see the surprise in his cold eyes. She didn't cower. "You think you can just walk in here and wave your checkbook and make the world bend to your will?" "I usually find that it does," Griffin replied, his smile tightening. "Not this time." She jabbed a finger, not at him, but at Samuel. "That man, the one you call it, the one you've been hunting and torturing for 15 years, he is 10 times the man you will ever be. He ran into a building that was collapsing in flames. He ran through fire to save a child he didn't even know. He's a hero." Then she jabbed her finger right into Griffin's expensive suit-clad chest. You're just a thief. You're a coward who stole a good man's life, his company, and his name, all to cover up your own crime. He's a hero. You're just the fire he couldn't put out." Griffin's face contorted, his mask of civilized charm melting away to reveal the pure, undiluted fury beneath. And you are not going to win," Eva interrupted, her voice ringing with the absolute certainty of her conviction. "You're not going to silence him, and you are not going to silence me." Griffin's handsome face was a mask of pure, undiluted rage. He was not used to being spoken to this way, not by his board, not by his lawyers, and certainly not by some broke, insignificant waitress in a one-room apartment. He took a half-step back, as if her words were a physical blow. He looked at Nash, his eyes burning with a silent, furious command. "Get her. Handle this." Nash, understanding his boss's fury, lunged forward. He was done playing games. He was a pit bull given a command. His hand, thick as a brick, shot out to grab Eva's arm. "You've got a big mouth, little girl," he snarled, his fingers just inches from her sleeve. "I wouldn't." The voice was not Eva's. It was Ms. Aris, and her tone was not pleading. It was a blade. It was so cold, so sharp, and so full of absolute authority that Nash, a man who operated on pure intimidation, actually froze mid-lunge. He stopped, more out of confusion than obedience. Griffin scoffed, his composure cracking. "And who, exactly, is going to stop me, Eleanor? You? You and this senile old wreck?" "No," Ms. Aris replied, a small, cold smile playing on her lips. She didn't even look at Griffin. She looked just past him, toward the broken doorway. "They are." Griffin, annoyed, turned, and his blood ran cold. Standing in the doorway, having entered so silently that no one, not even Nash's thugs, had heard them, were 2 new men. They were not like Nash's men. Nash's associates were bulky, cheap muscle in ill-fitting suits, hired for bar fights. These new men were tall, lean, and wore simple, perfectly tailored dark suits that screamed quiet expense. They had clear, coiled earpieces in their ears. They didn't look like bouncers. They looked like government agents. They were operators. They hadn't moved. They hadn't said a word. They were just there, a wall of absolute, calm, professional lethality, their eyes assessing the room, the threats, and Griffin himself. Nash's two thugs, who understood the brutal hierarchy of violence, instinctively took a half-step back. They knew, instantly, that they were catastrophically outmatched. Nash recognized a superior threat and slowly, reluctantly, lowered his hand from Eva. The entire balance of power in the tiny, squalid room had just shifted completely. Brute force had just met precision, and precision had won without moving a muscle. Griffin was trapped. He looked from his thugs to Ms. Arris's operators. He was a man who won with money or, failing that, with the threat of force. He had just tried both, and both had failed spectacularly. The checkbook was still clutched in his hand, a useless, pathetic prop. The humiliation radiated off him in waves, more potent than his expensive cologne. He was used to being in control. Now, he was the one who was cornered. His handsome face went from a furious red to a chilling pale white. He visibly smoothed his suit jacket, a desperate, reflexive attempt to regain his lost composure. He pointed a shaking finger, not at Eva, but at Ms. Arris. "This changes nothing, Eleanor, you hear me? This pathetic little stunt won't save you in court." He then turned his full, venomous gaze back to Eva. He couldn't touch her, so he used his last remaining weapon, his words. "This isn't over," he hissed, the whisper more menacing than any shout. "You took your shot. You aligned yourself with a senile old fool. When I win in court, and I will win, I am going to strip you of every last cent. I will make it my personal mission to see you back on the street, begging for scraps. You will never be safe. You hear me? You'll never win in court." He turned on his heel, a furious, impotent king, and stormed out of the apartment, shoving past his own men in his haste to flee. Nash gave Ms. Arris's professional team one last hateful look before he and his thugs followed, a pack of chastened dogs trailing their defeated master. The sound of their heavy feet pounding down the apartment stairs was the sound of a retreat. The climax was over. The antagonist had been physically vanquished. The silence that descended on the room was profound, broken only by the cold wind whistling through the splintered door frame. Eva, who had been running on pure, uncut rage for the last 5 minutes, finally let out the breath she'd been holding. Her legs, which had held her up so defiantly, suddenly turned to jelly. She sagged back against the peeling wallpaper, her entire body shaking, not with fear, but with the violent adrenaline crash. Samuel, who had been watching the entire exchange with a mixture of terror and awe, just stared at her, his eyes wide. Ms. Arris calmly pulled out her phone and made a call, her voice all business. "It's done. He's gone. Bring the car to the front entrance. We're moving." She hung up and turned to Eva, her professional demeanor back, but her eyes were warm with a new respect. "You were incredibly brave, Eva. I think I'm going to be sick," Eva stammered, her voice trembling. "That's a perfectly reasonable response," Ms. Arris said gently. "You just stared down the most dangerous man in the state. But he was right about one thing. It's not over. It's just moved to a new battlefield. And we are not going to be here when he decides to send Nash back without an invitation." She moved to Eva, taking her arm gently but firmly. "Now," she said, her voice full of purpose, "let's get you both somewhere safe until the hearing." She guided Eva and Samuel toward the door, past the 2 silent operators who flanked the exit. Eva took one last look at her tiny apartment, her lumpy couch, her pink debt notice, her old life. It was over. She was no longer a waitress. She was no longer hiding. She was a witness. And she was, for the first time in her life, safe. The two silent operators guided them from the ruined apartment, one leading, one following. Eva felt like she was moving through a dream, her hand still gently holding Samuel's arm. They didn't just walk, they were extracted, a smooth, professional operation that swept them from the grime of her old life into the silent, anonymous luxury of the waiting Audi. The car pulled away from the curb just as the first sirens, likely called by a neighbor about the door, began to wail in the distance. Inside the car, the silence was absolute, a thick, plush barrier against the city. Ms. Aris sat opposite them, her phone buzzing with updates. "We're taking you to a secure location," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "A hotel penthouse suite registered to a shell corporation. Griffin's men won't even know where to look. You'll be guarded 24 hours a day. You are completely safe." Samuel just nodded, his eyes closed, as if the very concept of safe was a foreign language he had to relearn. Eva watched the city lights smear past, her old life, her old fears, already feeling like they belonged to someone else. They entered the hotel, the Monarch, not through the grand lobby, but through a private underground garage, a place reserved for billionaires and politicians. They were escorted up a private, key-coded elevator, bypassing any chance of being seen. The elevator doors opened not into a hallway, but directly into the suite itself. It wasn't just a room. It was an apartment larger than the entire floor of her old building. Thick, cream-colored carpets muffled their footsteps. The air smelled faintly of clean linen and old wood, and the lights were soft and warm, a gentle glow against the dark, polished walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the far side revealed a breathtaking, godlike view of the city skyline, the lights twinkling like a fallen constellation. One of the operators, a tall, calm man, did a quick, silent sweep of the rooms before nodding to Ms. Aris. "The suite is clear. It's fully stocked. Will be posted outside the door. No one gets in or out without my authorization." He and his partner stepped back into the private elevator lobby, and the main door closed with a heavy, solid thud. The sound of the high-tech lock engaging was the sound of a bank vault being sealed. For the first time in 15 years, Samuel was truly safe. He stood frozen in the center of the vast living room, his hands trembling violently. He looked overwhelmed, a castaway suddenly finding himself in a palace. He ran his scarred hand over the back of a plush velvet sofa, as if testing if it was real. He looked at the gleaming dark wood kitchen, the unlit marble fireplace, the two massive closed bedroom doors. He turned to Eva, his face, which had been a mask of terror for so long, crumpled. His eyes swam with tears, his voice breaking. I don't understand," he whispered, the first real tears of relief, tracing paths through the grime on his face. I haven't slept in a real bed. I can't remember the last time I was warm or quiet." Eva's own eyes welled up. This was the immediate reward. This was the shift. It wasn't just luxury. It was humanity restored. It was peace. She gently took his hand, her own no longer shaking. "It's over, Samuel," she said, her voice thick but steady. "You're safe. We're safe. He can't get to us here." He looked out the window, at the sprawling city that had once been his kingdom, a city that had swallowed him whole for 1.5 decades. He wasn't looking at it as a victim anymore. He was looking at it as a man who had just been found. The luxurious hotel suite was a fortress, but the war was fought 6 months later, in a sterile, wood-paneled courtroom that felt colder than any alley. It wasn't a single hearing. It was a brutal, drawn-out battle. Griffin's legal team, a phalanx of $10,000 suits, had filed motion after motion, burying Miss Aris in a blizzard of paper and procedure. Now, the depositions were over, and the final hearing was underway. Griffin's lead attorney, a slick, silver-haired man named Harrison, was a master of character assassination, and Eva was his star target. "Miss Eva," Harrison said, his voice dripping with a fake, paternalistic sympathy, "you were, at the time you found Mr. Croft, over $50,000 in debt, is that correct?" "Yes, sir, from student loans, and you had just been fired or were about to be fired from your job as a waitress for, and I quote your manager, erratic behavior and poor performance?" "No, I dropped a tray because you saw him," Harrison pounced. "You saw this man, a man you hadn't seen in 15 years, and had this instantaneous, dramatic reaction? Or did you just see a payday?" "Objection," Miss Aris snapped. "Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained. Watch your tone, Mr. Harrison." But the seed was planted. The next day, Harrison paraded a series of experts to the stand, psychiatrists Griffin had kept on his payroll for years, who all testified that Samuel Croft's file showed a clear, textbook case of hero-complex pyromania. They spoke of his delusions, his violent obsessions, and the danger of enabling him. Then he called Mitch to the stand, who gleefully recounted how Eva was a spacey and desperate employee. But Harrison's masterpiece was the cross-examination of Eva. He held up her laminated, faded newspaper clipping in a plastic evidence bag, as if it were a murder weapon. "You've carried this with you for 15 years, correct? Every single day." "Yes, he's my hero. Your hero," Harrison mused. "Or your obsession. Tell me, Miss Eva, in those 15 years, did you ever try to find the other 9 children? Did you form a support group, or were you just waiting? Waiting for the mysterious hero to show up, a hero who just so happened to be the dispossessed founder of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. That's not true. I didn't know who he was." "You didn't? Or you just saw a vulnerable, mentally ill man, a man you'd been fantasizing about for over a decade, and you saw your chance?" "A sick, confused old man, with a very, very rich nephew. You saw an opportunity to become a consultant, to get a scholarship, to have all your debts magically erased. Isn't that the truth, Miss Eva? That you're not a witness? You're a calculating opportunist who found the perfect mark." Eva was trembling, the words hitting her like stones. She looked at the judge, at the jury, at Griffin, who was watching her with a cold, satisfied smile. His lawyers were brilliant. They were successfully painting her as a liar, a manipulator, and a gold digger. Eva sat there, trembling, the echo of Mr. Harrison's words, calculating opportunist, hanging in the air like poison. He had painted her as a monster, a predator. He stepped back, a final flourish of his hands to the jury, a smug, satisfied look on his face. "No further questions, Your Honor. I believe we've seen all we need to see." The judge, an older woman with tired but intelligent eyes, looked at Ms. Aris. "Redirect, counsel?" Ms. Aris stood, gathering her papers, but before she could speak, Eva spoke, her voice small but clear, cutting through the sterile courtroom air. "Your Honor, may I just say something, please?" Mr. Harrison shot to his feet. "Objection. The witness is not permitted to give a narrative." The judge held up a hand, silencing him. She studied Eva for a long, heavy moment. "This is highly irregular, Miss Eva, but given the direct and severe nature of the accusations made against your character by opposing counsel, I will allow it. But you will address me, and only me. Proceed." Eva took a deep, shuddering breath, her hands gripping the wooden rail of the witness box so hard her knuckles were white. She wasn't a lawyer. She couldn't fight Mr. Harrison with his own slick, cruel weapons. She could only tell the truth. "I'm not an opportunist," she began, her voice shaking but gaining a strange, cold strength. "And I'm not an obsession. I'm a survivor." She turned, just for a second, and locked eyes with Griffin Croft, who sneered. She turned back to the judge. "Mr. Harrison, he calls him sick. He calls him a pyromaniac. He says he's delusional." Her voice cracked. "He has no idea what he's talking about. He wasn't there." She looked down at her own hands, then back up, her eyes clear. I was 8 years old. I was in the last room on the second floor. The smoke was so thick I couldn't breathe. It was black, and it tasted like chemicals. It was so hot, Your Honor, so hot the paint on the walls was bubbling. I remember that. The courtroom, which had been shuffling and coughing, went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. "I was under the bed," Eva continued, her voice now a whisper that every person in the room leaned in to hear. "I was hiding. I remember thinking that I was going to die. I remember the smell of the old carpet burning, and the sound of the building roaring. It wasn't like a fire in a movie. It was alive. And then the window, it just exploded. Tears were streaming down her face now, hot and unstoppable, but her voice was strong. It wasn't a delusion. It wasn't a story I made up. It was an arm. A man's arm, wrapped in a burning jacket, smashing through the glass again and again and again. And then he reached in, through the smoke and the fire, and he grabbed me. His arm was on fire. I could smell it, but he didn't stop. He didn't let go. She was sobbing, but she wasn't weak. She was reliving it, forcing them all to relive it with her. He pulled me out of that window, and he held me so tight, and he dropped us both onto the grass below, and then he turned around. And he ran back. He ran back into the fire. She stood up in the witness box, her whole body shaking, and she pointed, her finger trembling, not at Griffin, but at the broken, frail man sitting behind Miss Arris. She pointed right at Samuel. That man is not a pyromaniac. That man is not sick, and he is not incompetent. That man is my hero. He is the man who saved my life. He is the man who traded his entire life, his arm, his mind, his company, for me, for a child he didn't even know. You want to know who's sick? You want to know who the real criminal is? It's the man who would let that happen and then call this hero a monster to save himself. The courtroom was stunned. Mr. Harrison was on his feet, sputtering, "Objection, objection, this is a circus." But the judge just raised a hand, silencing him. She was staring at Eva, and for the first time in the entire trial, her eyes were not just tired, they were moved. The public victory was complete. The flashes of cameras were a blinding, celebratory storm, a stark contrast to the grim, fluorescent lights of the courtroom. The press conference was held in the grand lobby of the Croft Industries headquarters, the very building Samuel had been exiled from for 15 long years. The mood was electric. At the podium, flanked by a beaming Miss Arris, stood Samuel Croft. He was unrecognizable from the frail, broken man who had stumbled into the corner bistro. He was healthy, his eyes clear and sharp. He wore an impeccably tailored dark suit. His white hair was neatly combed, and he stood with a quiet, dignified strength. He looked, once again, like the CEO he was always meant to be. He tapped the microphone, and the room fell silent. "Good morning." His voice was firm, resonating with a gentle authority that had been stolen from him. 15 years ago, a great injustice was done. Not just to me, but to the memory of 10 children, and to the hero who saved them. As of yesterday, the court has officially overturned the illegal conservatorship placed upon me by my nephew Griffin Croft. A wave of murmurs went through the press. Mr. Griffin Croft has been summarily removed from the board of this company, and I have been fully reinstated as CEO. This was the public confirmation of his victory, the total defeat of the antagonist. But I am not here to talk about my nephew, Samuel continued, his voice softening. I am here to talk about a promise that was broken. He looked out over the crowd, his eyes finding Eva, who stood quietly at the back, away from the spotlight. Their eyes met, and he smiled. Many of you know the story of the Cedar Hill Orphanage. You know about the fire. What you don't know is that on the day that orphanage opened, I created the Cedar Hill Hero Fund. It was a trust, endowed with billions of dollars, designed to provide for every single child who passed through those doors. When I was illegally removed, that fund was frozen, absorbed, and stolen. He leaned into the microphone, his voice ringing with passion. My first official act as CEO, effective 1 hour ago, is the complete and total restoration of the Cedar Hill Hero Fund. It will be restored, with compound interest for the last 15 years. Its mission will be fulfilled. Every survivor of that fire, and every child who was ever part of the Cedar Hill family, will have their education, their housing, and their medical care paid for. For life. He looked at Eva again, his voice thick with emotion. This is not just a corporate action. It is an apology for my failure to protect them for so long, and it is a promise. A promise to a very brave young woman who reminded me what it means to be a hero. This fund, and this company, will no longer be a monument to greed. It will be a testament to the fact that the truth, no matter how long it is buried, will always, always find its way to the light. Thank you. The office wasn't just bright, it was filled with light. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a view of the city that she had only ever seen from the ground, looking up. The walls were a warm, soft white. The desk was made of a smooth, light-colored wood, and the air smelled like new books and freshly brewed coffee, a world away from the stale grease and mildew of her old life. Eva stood by the window, not in her old, worn-out sneakers and stained apron, but in a simple professional blouse and slacks, looking down at the tiny, ant-like figures on the street below. She had been here for a week, and it still didn't feel real. The door opened with a soft, respectful knock, a sound she was still getting used to. It was Samuel. He wasn't the broken man from the diner or the imposing CEO from the press conference. He was just Samuel, smiling, holding a single thin folder. "Settling in, Eva?" he asked, his voice gentle. She turned from the window, a small, shy smile on her face. "It's a little different from the corner bistro. No one's yelled at me for spacing out yet." Samuel chuckled, a warm, genuine sound that filled the room. "You've earned the right to space out. Though I suspect you won't be doing much of it. You built this, you know. This whole floor. None of it would be here without you." "We built it," Eva corrected softly. I just yelled a lot in court." "You did more than that," he said, his expression turning serious, though his eyes were kind. "You reminded me who I was. You reminded me what this company was supposed to be for, and now." He walked over and held out the folder. "I want you to do that for others." Eva took it. It was light. Inside was not a stack of corporate reports, but a single-page profile. It was for a young man, 23 years old, who had aged out of the state foster care system. He was working 2 minimum-wage jobs to pay for night classes at a community college, and he was $3,000 behind on his rent. He was, in every way that mattered, her. "He's the first," Samuel said quietly, "the first recipient of the newly activated Cedar Hill Hero Fund. The board has given you full discretionary control. Your job isn't to run spreadsheets, Eva. Your job is to find them. Find the others like you. Find the ones who are falling through the cracks. The ones who just need one person to see them." Eva's fingers traced the name on the file. She felt the familiar sting of tears, but for the first time in her life, they weren't tears of fear or desperation. They were tears of purpose. She looked from the file to the frosted glass of her office door. She could see the elegant, simple lettering reversed from her side, but she knew exactly what it said. Eva, Director, Cedar Hill Hero Fund. Her old life, her past, her scar, it wasn't a weight anymore. It was a qualification. It was her strength. She wasn't just a survivor, a victim, a waitress. She was a provider. She was the one who could now look at a file like this, not with pity, but with recognition. She closed the folder. "Think you can handle it, Director?" Samuel asked, a proud twinkle in his eye. Eva looked up from the file, her small, shy smile replaced by a new, quiet confidence. "I know exactly where to start." The autumn sun was warm, filtering through the bright yellow leaves of a sprawling oak tree. Children's laughter drifted from a nearby playground, a happy, carefree sound that seemed to fill the air. Eva sat on a park bench, a simple cup of coffee in her hands, watching them. She was no longer pale, no longer vibrating with anxiety. She looked peaceful. Beside her, Samuel, bundled in a comfortable wool coat, fed a small piece of his sandwich to a persistent squirrel. He looked like a kind grandfather, not a haunted refugee. "He's got your number," Eva said with a small laugh. "He's persistent. I'll give him that." Samuel chuckled, tossing another small crust. They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, simply existing, two people who had pulled each other back from the brink. "You know," Eva said quietly, looking out at the families, "for 15 years, I thought that fire was the thing that ruined me. I thought it was the reason I was broke, the reason I was stuck, the reason I was me. I thought it was just a scar." Samuel looked at her, his eyes full of a wisdom that had been hard-earned. "And now I don't know," she mused. "It's still a scar, but it's also the reason I'm here. It's the reason I met you. It's the reason I have a purpose. It's not just an ending. It was a beginning, I guess." Samuel nodded, smiling. "It took me a long time to see my own scar that way. For a decade and a half, it was a brand, proof of what I'd lost. Proof of Griffin's victory." He held up his arm, the jagged skin pale in the afternoon light. "But it wasn't. It was a receipt, proof of what I'd done, proof of what I'd saved. And it led me, in the end, right back to you." Eva smiled, leaning her head back, closing her eyes in the sun. "The world is full of people like Griffin, who believe that power is a weapon and that secrets can be buried forever. It's full of people like Mitch, too afraid or too bitter to ever get involved. But it is also full of people like Eva, people who, despite being broke and tired and terrified, will still see another human being in pain and choose to act. We often think our past is a scar, a wound that defines us by the pain it caused. But sometimes that scar is a map. It's a map that reminds us not only of what we survived, but of who we are. It's a map that can, if we're brave enough to follow it, lead us right to where we're needed most. A single moment of recognition in a diner didn't just save 2 lives. It exposed a 15-year-old lie and restored a billion-dollar legacy, all because one person refused to look away. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If it moved you, if it reminded you that your own scars might be your greatest strength, please show your support for our channel. It means the world to us. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to comment and subscribe for more stories just like this every single week. Your support is what allows us to keep telling them. We'll see you in the next one.